Alright, so now let's start talking about colonial life. I'm going to start off by discussing the South and the Chesapeake regions. And really, due to the harsh living conditions, the average life expectancy was only around 40 years old. Life was pretty much centered around business, specifically the production of tobacco and other cash crops. Religion really wasn't important at all, and economic gain really took the forefront in people's lives. Religion kind of was on the back burner. Most of the population of the Chesapeake were indentured servants, which basically meant they were destitute, young, unskilled, and most of them were Europeans who promised to dedicate 3 to 7 years of their lives working on plantations for free, and in exchange, they got transportation to the New World, food, clothing, lodging, and other necessities. The Heterite system was important because it allowed an aristocrat to sponsor an indentured servant's passage to America, and sponsoring an indentured servant gave the aristocrat the right to buy 50 acres of land at a cheap price. But by giving the land to the masters, the indentured servants actually had a little chance to buy their own land, and this really kept the colonials poor, and later on led to the strife between poor servants and wealthy landowners. Also, unfortunately, many of the indentured servants who completed their obligated term of service were actually not capable of advancing independently. Many simply became subsistence farmers to make ends meet. Bacon's rebellion is important. It happened in 1676, and it was led by Nathaniel Bacon in the Virginia colony. Bacon basically became really mad with the Indians in Virginia and Governor Berkeley's friendly policies towards the Indians. So Bacon decided to drive out a lot of the Indians out of Virginia, while at the same time burning down the city's capital and forcing Governor Berkeley to flee to England. Now, this rebellion is important because it shows one of the first revolts against law in American history. This is the very first rebellion, which is, of course, makes it important, and also shows how weak government was back then. I mean, the guy basically made the governor flee away to England, so shows, it definitely shines a negative light on government. Alright, so after the few waves of indentured servants realized their dull prospects of living in the U.S. through entering as an indentured servant, the word basically spread back to Europe, and the number of indentured servants drastically declined. The decline in indentured servants made the Chesapeake colonies rely on African slaves to work the plantations, which is sad because unfortunately that's how slavery really... that's why the decline of indentured servants is what really led to this huge burst in slavery, especially in the South. Alright, so now let's talk about New England. New England is completely different from the South and the Chesapeake colonies. First off, the average life expectancy was 70, which is about double of what it was down south. And also, New England's geography didn't favor cultivation, so they focused on industry and trading. And also, in contrast to the South, many people who came to New England came as families. They didn't come in as indentured servants. They didn't come in as single males and single females. They came with whole families, a mom, a dad, and kids. Also, in addition to the family-oriented demographic, religion was also a really big part in people's lives in New England, which, as we talked earlier, it wasn't at all down south. The original Puritans were really worried about their kids and grandchildren not being as loyal and faithful as they were, so they started what were called Jeremiads, and Jeremiads were basically lectures that preachers gave to make people feel guilty about not being really religiously strict. And another thing that they did to kind of boost religious fervor was the Half-Wit Covenant, which was in the 1660s. It was created to increase the waning church membership. The Half-Wit Covenant allowed people to basically people who fell short of the visible saint status. It allowed them to be converted and members of the church. So it basically kind of reduced the qualifications that were required to be members of the church, which was again in response to the declining church membership at the time. Also, another thing you might want to know is the First Great Awakening of the 1730s. It's also tied into religion because it was actually a product, just like the other two were. It was a product of a decline in religious fervor. Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield used really vivid language to really instill fear in the hearts of non-believers through discussions on eternal damnation of non-believers. Edwards preached Calvinism, which is, of course, predestination, and Whitefield preached evangelism. Edwards and Whitefield's new rhetoric was actually labeled New Light, while the more traditional style of preaching was labeled Old Light, and many of the Old Lights disagreed with the New Light style. Another important thing you might want to note is in 1690, the Salem witch trials took place, which is basically where 20 people were executed because a group of crazy girls accused random people of being witches just because they were bored. Also, another important thing you might want to know about New England is that education was really highly valued in New England, and it was completely disregarded and just not even important in the South. But still, it wasn't the kind of education we have today. Most of the education back then in New England was really just focused on studying religion. Alright, so now let's talk about a little colonial extras, just kind of tying up loose ends on colonial America, and then we'll move on to the American Revolution. The triangle trade is important because it occurred between the colonies, England, and Africa. From the colonies and the Indies, natural resources like indigo, rice, tobacco were sent to England. From England, weapons and textiles were sent to Africa. And from Africa, slaves were sent to the Indies and the colonies. Some important literature you might want to know is Ben Franklin, who wrote the Poor Richard's Almanac, which basically included common phrases and altruisms in the English language. And of course, you have to know about the French and Indian War, which was also called the 7 Years' War, which was a battle between the French and Indians who fought Britain on behalf of the U.S. colonies. The Proclamation of 1763 ended the 7-Year War, and it declared settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains illegal. Now, although the proclamation was meant to resolve the issues of Native American residents, the colonists really saw it as a form of oppression and restraint, and that really led to the American Revolution, which I'm going to talk about later. And also, after the war was over, Britain won. Britain found itself in a massive debt, but so it decided to actually tax the colonies. The colonists appreciated Britain's help in the war, but they didn't really feel like they deserved to be taxed, which of course led to the American Revolution, and I'll talk about that next.